Welcome to Chasing Curiosity TV. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more updates. He world watched with bated breath as Anchorage, Alaska, a city often overlooked on the global stage, suddenly found itself thrust into the center of an unprecedented crisis. Once known for its rugged beauty and remote tranquility, Anchorage was now the focus of international attention, its fate intertwined with the destiny of nations. In a matter of hours, Anchorage became the epicenter of a global crisis. News tickers flashed, breaking, Anchorage in chaos. The city's streets, usually quiet, were now filled with the sounds of sirens, chants, and the relentless hum of helicopters overhead. Two storms collided here, one political, one natural. A fierce political showdown erupted just as a devastating natural disaster struck, amplifying the chaos and confusion. The city was battered by both the fury of nature and the passions of its people. Anchorage, chosen for its supposed neutrality and distance from the world's power centers, was now a battleground. Military vehicles rolled through neighborhoods, and tense standoffs unfolded between protesters and law enforcement, each side desperate to be heard. Former President Trump had extended a dramatic invitation to Vladimir Putin, bringing the Russian leader to Anchorage for a high-stakes summit. Their goal? To negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, a conflict that had already shaken the foundations of Europe and the world. But as the world's eyes turned to this remote city, Anchorage itself began to unravel. Floodwaters surged through neighborhoods, forcing families to flee. Protest crowds swelled, their banners waving defiantly as police struggled to maintain order. The summit's promise of peace was quickly overshadowed by the chaos erupting in the streets. Barricades were overturned and protesters scattered as riot police advanced, the air thick with tension and uncertainty. News crews captured every moment, barricades hastily erected, sandbags lining flooded streets, and helicopters circling above, their searchlights cutting through the gloom. Anchorage was a city on edge, its future hanging in the balance. Inside conference rooms, diplomats from Ukraine, NATO and the Western Alliance watched the crisis unfold, knowing that the fate of their nations, and perhaps the world order itself, was being decided here, in this unlikely place. Anchorage was no longer just a city, it had become a symbol of a world teetering on the edge. The storm clouds above mirrored the uncertainty below. As emergency lights flickered through the night, the headlines were no exaggeration. Anchorage in chaos blared across screens and newspapers, capturing the gravity of the moment. This was chaos, raw and unfiltered. It was a moment of uncertainty not just for a city but for a nation, and for the entire world. The eyes of millions watched, waiting to see what would happen next in Anchorage on the brink. Anchorage fought two battles: relentless floodwaters and political upheaval. An atmospheric river unleashed record rains, swelling rivers and submerging neighborhoods. Families fled as Ship Creek tore through the city. Simultaneously, Putin's visit ignited massive protests. Activists filled downtown with blue and yellow, chanting for Ukraine and against Russian aggression. Emergency services were overwhelmed, police diverted to security, firefighters on standby for unrest. The city became both disaster zone and fortress. The state of emergency was nearly drowned out by the summit's noise. Protesters and sandbags lined the same streets, united by crisis. Sirens and chants blended in a surreal soundtrack. Anchorage was no longer just a city in Alaska, it was a symbol of a world grappling with climate disaster and conflict. Here, nature and politics collided in a spectacular, tragic convergence. The leaders' arrivals cut through the chaos with displays of power. Air Force One landed under gray skies, security was unprecedented. Snipers, helicopters, and armored motorcades swept through lockdown streets. Hours later, Putin's jet arrived, his security just as formidable. Russian flags on American streets underscored the gravity of the moment. The summit venue became a fortress fencing, razor wire, and thousands of troops. Residents watched from behind barricades, their city transformed. The motorcades moved through sanitized corridors, insulated from Anchorage's reality. The world's problems had arrived, taking precedence over local suffering. For Anchorage, the fate of the city, and the world, rested with the men inside those armored cars. The city was locked down, its people mere spectators. The summit's stakes were immense, the world was watching. The protests surged like a human flood, matching the rising waters. The city's streets, usually filled with the hum of daily life, were transformed into rivers of people, each step a ripple in a growing tide of resistance. Umbrellas and raincoats did little to dampen the spirit. Instead, the rain seemed to fuel their determination, as if the very sky was weeping in solidarity. Delaney Park Strip became a sea of blue and yellow, thousands united for Ukraine. The park, once a quiet green space, was now alive with the energy of hope and defiance. Flags fluttered in the wind, their colors vivid against the gray sky, creating a living mosaic of solidarity. People from all walks of life, young and old, families and friends, stood shoulder to shoulder, their hearts beating as one. Flags waved, banners stretched, and chants echoed, "Stop Putin now!" Stand with Ukraine. The air vibrated with the power of their voices, each chant a declaration that injustice would not go unanswered. The slogans, painted in bold letters, became rallying cries that united strangers into a single, unstoppable force. The Ukrainian anthem rose above the crowd, a symphony of resistance. Voices, some trembling with emotion, others strong and unwavering, blended together in a song that carried across the city. It was more than music. It was a promise, a vow to stand firm in the face of adversity. Ukrainian Americans traveled from across the country carrying portraits of lost loved ones and signs naming devastated cities. Each photograph told a story of heartbreak and resilience, a reminder that the conflict was not just headlines but deeply personal. The names of cities, Mariupol, Bucha, Kharkiv, were spoken with reverence, each one a scar and a badge of honor. Their grief and anger were palpable, their stories personalizing the headlines. Tears mixed with rain on painted cheeks, and every embrace between strangers was a silent acknowledgement of shared pain. The crowd's emotions ran deep, turning sorrow into strength and outrage into action. The protest challenged the summit's narrative, justice and freedom, not just deals and borders. As world leaders debated behind closed doors, the demonstrators outside demanded that human lives, not political interests, take center stage. Their presence was a reminder that real change begins with the courage to speak out. Cameras broadcast their passion worldwide. The world watched as their message crossed borders and languages, inspiring others to stand up for what is right. The protest became a beacon, shining a light on the struggle for justice and the power of collective action. They were a moral counterweight to cold geopolitics. Their silent stares and steady hands holding flags spoke volumes, reminding those in power that behind every policy are real people with real hopes and fears. Their presence demanded the world not look away. Each determined face was a plea for attention, a call to action for those watching from afar. They stood as witnesses, refusing to let the world forget the cost of indifference. The protest was more than noise. It was a living reminder of the human cost. Candles flickered in memory of the fallen, and flowers were laid with trembling hands. Every embrace, every tear, was a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who refused to be broken. A nation's fate, they insisted, was not a bargaining chip. Their voices, amplified by megaphones and banners, declared that sovereignty and dignity are not up for debate. They stood firm, unwavering in their demand for respect and recognition. Their roar echoed a simple truth: justice matters. In that moment, their unity became their strength, and their message rang out: the world must not turn away from the fight for freedom and human dignity. The city's dual crises collided in scenes of organized chaos. On 4th Avenue, city workers stacked sandbags against floodwaters, while protesters faced riot police just blocks away. Protesters, seeing overwhelmed crews, joined in to help, flags set aside for shovels. For a moment, unity transcended division, but the chaos also heightened tension. Flooded streets forced protesters closer to the summit's security perimeter. Police, on edge, saw every movement as a potential breach. Standoffs grew more frequent and tense. The rising water squeezed everyone together, raising the risk of confrontation. Reporters captured the dual reality flood on one side, protest on the other. Anchorage became a symbol of a world unraveling, climate disaster and political failure feeding off each other. The story was no longer just about the summit, but a system under strain. Inside the Denaina Center, chaos faded to tense silence. The summit was sealed off, a fortress of negotiation. Trump and Putin faced each other, the fate of millions in their hands. The war in Ukraine had reached a critical point. The world demanded resolution. Every word, every gesture was loaded with consequence. Security was airtight. No electronics, minimal aids, mutual suspicion. The bubble allowed frank negotiation but risked disconnect from the human reality outside. The agenda: ceasefire lines, occupied territories, security guarantees, sanctions. Each point was a minefield of history and strategy. Trump pushed for a quick deal. Putin sought to solidify gains and fracture the West. Ukraine's fate was debated by others, its voice absent. The silence inside was the world holding its breath. The stakes could not have been higher. The protest's most powerful moments came from personal stories. Olena, a refugee, stood silently with a photo of her destroyed home, her dignity more powerful than any slogan. Veterans from Ukraine, some wounded, bore witness to the war's reality and refused compromise. Women in traditional dress sang haunting folk songs, asserting identity and resilience. These stories transformed the protest from demonstration to profound humanity. They reminded the world that Ukraine was more than territory, it was people, culture, and hope. The human cost was made visible, a moral accusation in the cold Alaskan air. While leaders debated lines on a map, the people outside spoke of lives lost and futures stolen. Their presence demanded, can there be peace without justice? The Anchorage talks unfolded as the war in Ukraine entered a new era, AI-driven conflict. Swarms of autonomous drones dominated the battlefield, shifting the military balance. Ukraine's recent offensive used coordinated drone attacks and electronic warfare to stunning effect. NATO's technological support was crucial, fueling Russian accusations of a shadow war. The digital battlefield extended to disinformation and cyberattacks, complicating any peace. Deepfakes and cyberstrikes blurred truth and trust. The new warfare made ceasefires fragile. One drone or hacker could spark escalation. Technology empowered Ukraine but made peace harder to enforce. The war was now fought in trenches, skies, and cyberspace. The future of conflict and peace had changed forever. In a move that stunned the world, Donald Trump stepped onto the global stage to unveil his Peace for Prosperity plan. The proposal called for an immediate ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, aiming to halt the bloodshed that had gripped Eastern Europe for years. Trump, flanked by American and Ukrainian flags, declared that the time had come to end the violence and seek a new path forward. Under the plan, the current front lines would be recognized as a temporary border, freezing the conflict in place. Ukrainian soldiers, weary from months of fighting, would hold their positions while diplomats worked behind the scenes. The world watched as the fate of entire regions hung in the balance. In exchange for this uneasy peace, the plan offered phased sanctions relief for Russia. Economic restrictions that had crippled the Russian economy would be gradually lifted, provided Moscow complied with the terms. This carrot-and-stick approach was designed to entice Russia to the negotiating table, but it also sparked fierce debate in Western capitals. Perhaps the most controversial element of the plan was the promise of referendums in Crimea and the Donbas region. In 5 years, residents of these contested territories would vote to decide their own fate, whether to remain part of Ukraine or join Russia. Critics argued this legitimized the occupation and rewarded aggression, while supporters claimed it was a pragmatic solution to a seemingly intractable conflict. The world was sharply divided. Protesters denounced the plan as a betrayal of Ukrainian sovereignty, while others cheered what they saw as a realistic compromise that could finally bring peace. The debate raged in the streets and in the halls of power. The proposal sent shockwaves through NATO, threatening the unity of the alliance. Some member states feared that accepting the plan would set a dangerous precedent, while others saw it as the only way to prevent a wider war. Tensions ran high as diplomats scrambled to find common ground. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin saw opportunity. Sanctions relief, territorial gains, and a fractured West all played into his hands. The Russian leader moved quickly to exploit divisions among his adversaries, hoping to secure a victory without further bloodshed. If a deal could be struck, it would mark a turning point in modern history. The world's most powerful leaders gathered at the negotiating table, their every word and gesture scrutinized by millions. Trump, ever the showman, was ready to claim a historic peace. He promised that his plan would end the suffering and restore stability to a fractured world. Supporters hailed him as a peacemaker, while critics warned of the moral cost. But the stakes could not have been higher. If talks failed, the war would only intensify. Cities already scarred by conflict would face even greater devastation, and the human toll would mount. The consequences would ripple far beyond Ukraine. Global markets teetered on the edge, and governments around the world braced for the fallout. Instability threatened to engulf not just Europe, but the entire international order. All eyes turned to Anchorage, Alaska, a city itself, battered by disaster, now thrust into the center of world affairs. As floodwaters rose in its streets, so too did the stakes of the summit. The world's future seemed to hang on a gamble made in this unlikely place. Across continents, people marched for peace, while soldiers on both sides longed for an end to the fighting. Candlelight vigils flickered in the night, a symbol of hope that a just peace might still be possible. The outcome of the Anchorage summit would shape the international order for years to come. The city, battered and divided, stood as a silent witness to history in the making. As the world waited for an answer, the tension was palpable. In homes, on city streets, and in the corridors of power, everyone wondered, would this be a deal with the devil, or the first step on a path to lasting peace?